Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a You Choose My TBR, specifically just some books that I'm hoping to get around to in the second half of the year. I have a bunch of different categories of books that I want to look into, and within each of these categories you're going to get to vote on one book within each, and there's going to be 5 books in every category. To give some context to these categories, recently I did a video about the pros and cons of popular books, not the books themselves, but the ways in which we tend to elevate popular books, and these books are already popular, but online, those are the videos that are going to get viewed more, the ones that are about popular books. And then therefore, if those videos get more views, usually the people talking about those books get more subscribers, and then they're the ones that get the most exposure, the most opportunities, and when people are looking for book recommendations, they go to those people, and then often those people are just telling you about more popular books again. And it's kind of this weird cycle where a lot of stories that aren't as popular aren't going to ever get the recognition if maybe some effort isn't put in to find these books. So a lot of these categories are going to fall into that. This does not mean that I'm abandoning any book that's even remotely popular or anything like that. My goal is still to read books that I'm interested in. I'll have that video linked down below, so if you want to see more of that conversation, you can. But I'm going to read off to you the categories. I am going to break this video up into a couple different parts because of the fact that I have so many categories. The categories, though, are going to be self-published books, young adult books that are written and or about a male protagonist, and then the flip side of that, adult fantasy books that are about and or written by a female. From there, I was going to have a non-European inspired fantasy category, but I realized that because there's only going to be 5 books within each category, I just couldn't get 5 to fit like that. I just had so many that I wanted to have you guys have the opportunity to vote on. So I was like, I gotta break this down. So I decided to break it down into Asian fantasy, African fantasy, and then Latin fantasy. For myself though, I also want to branch out a little bit with genre as well. So I read a ton of fantasy, and I would like to have a little bit more to offer when it comes to reviews and whatnot. So I'm also going to have books that are either written about or are written by Black authors, Latin authors, and Asian authors. And then these particular books are going to be a mix of genres. Some of them might be contemporary, some of them might be magical realism, so on and so forth. And we have books that are about a character or have some kind of a theme that has to do with mental health. Another one would be books that are either written by or about a LGBTQ character. Then we have historical fiction, and I have a few more categories, but I'm going to just pick for myself which ones and not let you guys vote. Sorry, there's just a couple that when I went to make the categories, I was like, no, I really want this one, where if you guys had voted on any other book besides the one I really wanted, I would have been bummed out. So one of them is nonfiction. There's a book I'm going to be reading. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I have a video idea in mind, but I'm going to leave that one up to me. And then also the one of the Latin ones I'm going to leave up to me. And then 2 of them that I haven't mentioned yet, one of them is either going to be random books or it's going to be middle grade books. We'll see. But that one I'm going to have my patrons vote on over on Patreon. And then I actually own a couple of books that are translated from another language, and I think I'm going to have my patrons vote on that one as well. The ones that we're going to be talking about today would be historical fiction, the young adult that has to do with guys, the adult that has to do with the ladies, and then the non-fantasy books that are following Asian characters and or authors, and then same thing but for Black characters and or authors. The rest will all be in the following video, so that's where you'll get to vote on those ones. Especially, I know a lot of you are also fantasy fans, so that's where you'll get to vote on the Asian fantasy, African fantasy, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to start with historical fiction. These are 4 of the 5 options. The 5th option I'll get to in a bit, but because these are historical fiction, I'm just going to give you a very basic rundown of each of them. So the first one would be Beneath a Scarlet Sky, which is a World War II story. The next one would be Library of Legends, also a World War II story, but it follows a character in China, which is a setting we don't see as often in books about World War II. Usually you're seeing stuff in Europe. Next up would be Warrior of the Wild, which is a Viking story. I really enjoyed another one of this author's works, but it was so different from this one. The other one that I've read by her would be Shadows Between Us, which was ridiculous and a good time. Next, we have Vagabond, which is a story that follows a real person in history, Musashi. He was this very well-known samurai. My husband really enjoys this series. I've been wanting to pick it up for so long. It has the most gorgeous artwork. Oh my gosh. And then the fifth option would be Beloved, or Beloved, however you want to say it, which is extremely tragic. It follows a woman who was a slave. Switching now to the young adult books that either follow male characters or are written by men, because they are rare. Oh my gosh. I was trying to find specifically some form of fantasy or science fiction, dystopian, that kind of thing. And there's so few, which I know and I mention all the time, and I wish that was different. So I'm trying to find some. And there's actually a few that I'm very interested in. One would be Unwind by Neil Shusterman. He always has stories that you totally have to suspend disbelief for and just be like, yeah, sure, somehow that's where the world ended up. And that's definitely the case with this one, because the premise is that we've gone through another civil war and it has to do with reproductive rights. And the conclusion that people come to is that it's totally fine to take your child before a certain age and unwind them, where you basically kill them, but then you use their body parts and you can have them as like a donor, and they can live on in other people. And we're following some teenagers whose parents want to do this for them, or want to do this to them, and they're like, nah, I don't want that. So it sounds pretty crazy. I've heard mixed things, but I'm interested. Next up, we have There Will Come a Darkness. This one, I have heard it's compared to Six of Crows a little bit, where it's a little bit dark, it's a little bit twisted, and you follow a bigger cast of characters. Next up is a book that is a little bit older, but I rarely hear anybody talk about it, and that would be Finnegan of the Rock, which follows a character. It kind of sounds like it's kind of a King Arthur vibe to it. Next up, we have The Knife of Never Letting Go. I've heard really good things about this one. My friend Jade from the channel Bedtime Bookworm really likes it, but it is apparently told in a very bizarre way, because in this world, the character can hear other people's thoughts, and so the way it's written is pretty chaotic, apparently. And then the last book for this category would be The Gilded Wolves, which I have also heard kind of mixed things about, but I'm still very interested in it. It follows a character who is kind of a treasure hunter. They're looking for what might be their inheritance, and it takes place in 1889. We're seeing in this setting, we're on the cusp of sort of an industrial revolution, so things are very much changing, and the character ends up banding together with a group of misfits, and it sounds like a good time. Next up, we have some adult fantasy and other genres that are similar to fantasy that are written by women or are about women. Jumping into this one, these are the 4 options that I have. I also have Foundry Side, I just don't have it here. So Foundry Side would be the first one I'll mention, and this is a story that follows a character who, in their world, their magic is sort of coding, and every object has a code, and our character kind of can hack into those codes, and I think they're able to kind of manipulate objects. Next up, we have A Natural History of Dragons. I actually started this one a little while back and then wasn't able to continue on with it, but it's kind of a memoir sort of story. It's this woman, you're kind of following her life, and she was somebody who would discover the fossils of dragons, which is pretty cool. So you're not actually seeing dragons really in the book, you're more just following this lady who found fossils of dragons. Ninth Reign is written by a lady, but I think that the main character is a fellow, and this one, even reading the synopsis, I'm still not exactly sure what's going on. The cover is super beautiful, and you're following a couple of different characters. I'm not sure if you're gonna get different perspectives, or if you get one perspective and then he joins with a couple of characters and their side characters, because I haven't read it yet, so I don't know. But it says, the prospect of facing down monsters and retrieving artifacts is preferable to the abomination left behind. Next up, we have The Bear and the Nightingale. Don't mind my half-price books sticker, but this is a Russian folklore-inspired story. It is a Russian setting, and I've heard this is very atmospheric, that it's very good to read this in the colder months, but we follow a main character who, her stepmother is pretty evil seeming, and she's just trying to either groom this stepdaughter, the main character, to be a part of a convent, or to marry her off. And then this chick's like, no, please, I don't want that. The last one in this category would be The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon, and this particular one follows a character who has the ability to kind of break into people's minds, and she ends up being kidnapped, and she has to try and do what her captors say to get closer to them to try and eventually break her way out. And I think she's going to try to use her powers to kind of help her. Next up, we have books that are written by and or are about Black characters or Black authors, and this would be the selection right here. Just to clarify too, in case you forgot, these are the ones that are kind of non-fantasy, because I will have a part 2 where I'm talking about fantasy, but I'm going to start with Underground Railroad. This is by Colson Whitehead, who a lot of people have seen The Nickel Boys, and that one is his newer work. My husband has read that one and Underground Railroad, which is about if there was actually an Underground Railroad, and he really liked this one. He liked both, but this one for him just really stood out. He keeps asking me too. He's like, when are you going to put up that video where people get to vote? Because I really want to vote on that one. Next up, we have the graphic novel adaptation of Kindred by Octavia Butler, and this follows a woman who is living basically modern day US and then somehow is transported to slave times, and she is Black, and there's all sorts of things that happen. Very different in tone from the last two. We have Slay, and this is a story about a video game world, Slay, and our main character is in our world, but she is kind of secretly a developer for this game, and it's very much played by a lot of Black kids, and then something happens in the game that leads to violence in real life, and then this game used to be kind of this underground thing, and not a ton of people knew about it, but because of the violence that occurs, now it's getting tons of media attention, and our main character, she's secretly a developer, but somebody is wanting to sue them, insisting that they discriminate against people who are white and they aren't welcoming, and there's all sorts of stuff that happens. The media is labeling all the people that play this game as like thugs and everything, and I've heard really good things about this book. I just haven't seen a ton of people talk about it. I love video games, so I'm wondering if a lot of what I'm going to be seeing in this book is going to be almost, you know, just so accurate to how the gaming community can be. Next up, we have the story Pride. This is actually one of my very good friends, Jashana, from the channel Jashana C. She loved this story. She particularly loved the writing style, more so than the characters themselves, but it is a Pride and Prejudice retelling, and it's about gentrification. The last one in this category would be The Louding Voice. This one sounds extremely tragic, but it follows a 14-year-old girl who has been, her life is basically already decided for her. There's an arranged marriage where she's going to be the third wife to an older man, even though she's only 14 years old. And then stuff happens where she's basically sold to become a servant to this wealthy family. And there's a passage in the synopsis that says, as a yielding daughter, a subservient wife, and a powerless servant, Adunni is repeatedly told that she is nothing, but she won't be silent. She is determined to find her voice in a whisper, in a song, in broken English, until she can speak for herself. The last category for today would be books written by Asian authors and or about Asian characters, and this is specifically the non-fantasy one again. I actually only own one of the books from this list, and that would be Wicked Fox. The rest of them, I tried to always find books that I already owned because then I can get through a lot of my TBR, but I also found some of the ones I was interested in on Scribd. This one is Korean folklore inspired, and it follows a character who has powers, and she feeds on men, and then she meets a boy around her age who it's like, well, I kind of am interested in this boy. So it's kind of a folklore inspired story, but also a little bit of a romance. Next up, we have American Panda, and I'm actually just going to read the synopsis for this one because I feel like you can clearly hear the author's voice in the synopsis, and it sounds really fun. So it says, at 17, May should be in high school, but skipping 4th grade was part of her parents' master plan. Now a freshman at MIT, she is on track to fulfill the rest of her predetermined future. Become a doctor, marry a pre-approved Taiwanese Ivy Leaguer, produce a litter of babies. With everything her parents have sacrificed to make her cushy life a reality, she can't bring herself to tell them the truth. That she 1, hates germs, 2, falls asleep in biology lectures, and 3, has a crush on her classmate Darren Takahashi, who is decidedly not not Taiwanese. But when she reconnects with her brother, who is estranged from the family for dating the wrong woman, she starts to wonder if all the secrets are truly worth it. Can she find a way to be herself, whoever that is, before her web of lies unravels? Next up would be Love from A to Z, which actually sounds like it's going to be really sad. It follows a character who is Muslim, and she ends up getting in trouble at school with a teacher, and so she ends up moving, and she kind of feels bad because she ended up getting some of her friends in trouble. And then there's also a perspective from a young man who is diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and this is after he already lost his mom. Next up is the story Want, which is kind of like a futuristic sci-fi sort of story where we have a very polluted world to the point where the wealthy can afford to protect themselves by wearing these suits, but the poor end up getting sick or dying, and we have a character who is poor and his mother died, and so he decides he's going to infiltrate the rich and try to change things for the better. It kind of sounds a little bit like Red Rising, which I'm down for that. The last one in this category would be Outrun the Moon. This is by Stacey Lee, who wrote The Downstairs Girl, which I read recently and very much enjoyed. And it would seem that something she does in both that book and this book is take a real time in history and then follow an Asian character in the US at this time. So we're following a character who is Chinese, and they are determined to get into this school that is normally just accepting really wealthy white girls, and that's her dream, is to get into this school. She's very determined, but then there's a natural disaster, and it was a real natural disaster in history, and it's just kind of following all of these different events. Whichever one within each category has the most amount of votes is the one that I will be reading sometime in the next 6 months. This isn't going to be the only set of books that I read. I'm still going to be reading other things, but I wanted to let all of you get to decide on some of them, but also because I'm not going to be able to read every single one of these in the next 6 months, I wanted to give you a little bit of information about them so that even if the one you vote on doesn't win, you can still maybe pick it up. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.